High in the snow-covered mountains of Idaho, a man lived alone, haunted by the family he lost. He thought his story was over until one stormy day he found two fragile lives clinging to survival, a lynx and a bobcat. He raised them, loved them like his own. But when the law took them away, no one could have imagined what happened next. On a night when the world went white, they came back, and what they did would shock everyone. The mountains had been silent all morning, the kind of silence that swallows even the wind. Ethan Hale trudged through the slush behind his cabin, camera hanging cold against his chest. He wasn't looking for anything, just trying to remember what it felt like to care about something again. Then, faint and trembling, came a sound he couldn't ignore. It was a cry, thin, uneven, almost human. He stopped, heart skipping. Snowflakes drifted in lazy spirals. As he followed the sound through the pine, the world had no color, only white and grey and breath. Beneath a fallen log, something stirred. A small shape, matted with blood and frost, let out another desperate mew. Ethan knelt, brushing snow from a tiny head. The kitten's fur was pale and sleek, its flank trembling with shallow breaths. When his glove brushed it, another movement caught his eye, a flash of reddish-brown just beyond the log. A second cub, eyes open wide, watching him from the shadows. The second one hissed, low but brave, tiny teeth bared. Its eyes burned gold in the grey air. Ethan whispered softly, his voice breaking against the cold. "Easy, little one. It's okay." The sound of his own gentleness startled him. It had been years since he'd spoken like that. He unzipped his heavy coat, the air biting at his chest. The pale cub went in first, shivering against his heartbeat. The reddish one hesitated, claws curled into the bark. For a moment, they stared at each other, man and wild thing, until instinct gave way to need. It crawled forward, trembling, and pressed into the warmth beside the other. Ethan closed the coat and felt their tiny bodies against his ribs, two fragile lives fighting for heat. He could feel their hearts fluttering like trapped birds. He whispered again, quieter now, "Hang on, we're almost home." For the first time in years, the word home didn't sound empty. By the time he reached the cabin, dusk had fallen. He lit the fire, peeled off his wet gloves, and laid the cubs near the hearth. One slept instantly, a pale bundle rising and falling with the rhythm of the flames. The other, red-furred, restless, kept staring at him, as if trying to understand what he was. He poured warm water into a tin cup and dipped a cloth, wiping blood from the smaller one's paw. Its cry was weak, but alive. The red one growled softly, edging closer. Ethan smiled, exhausted, voice a whisper, meant for no one. "You're the tough one, huh? You look like ash in the snow." The name lingered, and something in him stirred. He fed them with trembling hands. Old instincts returning, the kind you can't unlearn once you've loved and lost. When the fire softened, both cubs curled into the crook of his arm. Ethan leaned back against the cabin wall, eyes half closed. Outside, the wind rose again, carrying the low hum of something eternal. He remembered his daughter's laugh, then light, like the cry he'd heard in the snow, and for a long moment he didn't know if the warmth in his chest came from the fire or from two tiny hearts sleeping there. The mountains outside groaned under the weight of new snow, but inside, something fragile had begun to thaw. The night stretched on, blue and silent. Every creak of the logs, every flicker of the fire felt like a heartbeat returning to the world. Ethan looked down at the cubs, one pale as winter light, one burning like autumn, and thought, maybe the forest hadn't taken everything from me after all. When he finally drifted to sleep, the smaller one stirred and pressed closer to him. The red one lifted its head once, eyes glinting in the firelight, as if already keeping watch. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't dream of loss. He dreamed of snow, and of two tiny footprints leading him home again. The storm burned itself out, leaving a clean hush over the ridge. Inside the cabin, the hearth breathed orange. Ethan laid 2 bowls by the fire and watched the cubs learn the room. The pale one curled into the blanket without a sound. The red one paced, sniffing corners like a scout who didn't trust the map he was given. Ethan moved slowly, the way you do with skittish hearts. He soaked a cloth in warm milk and held it to small mouths. The pale cub accepted, eyes closing in relief. The red one batted the cloth away, then crept back, licking his knuckles with quick, decisive laps, a spark of pride flashing in those amber eyes. Days began to find a rhythm. Ethan chopped wood, checked tracks, taped handwritten labels on jars. The cubs shadowed him like mismatched question mark. The red one climbed chair legs, tugged at bootlaces, pounced on dust motes. The pale one preferred windowsills, watching snow drift past as if time itself fell in slow feathers. Names came when they were ready to stick. The pale one became Willow, soft but unbending. The red one earned Ash for the ember glint in his coat and the way trouble smudged wherever he went. He liked the sound, lifted his head when Ethan said it, and answered with a small rasp, more statement than meow. Ash wanted everything at once. Heat, space. The bright tin lid he could bat across the floor. He practiced tiny stalks, belly low, tail twitching, then flew at Ethan's sock with a growl too big for his size. Willow watched, blinking like a patient teacher. When he slipped, she stepped over and groomed his ear, restoring order. Night brought the first clash. Ethan trimmed Willow's bandage. Ash sprang closer, curious, paw sweeping for the gauze. Willow flinched in pain, a sharp sound ripping the quiet. Ethan shouted one word, too hard, and the cabin snapped shut around it. Ash froze, ears flattened, chest heaving as if the voice had shoved him backwards. The echo dragged something old from Ethan. His hands shook. That same shout had once cracked across a smoke-choked hallway, a useless command thrown at fire. He saw a pink bicycle, small shoes near a door that never opened again. The present wavered. He sank to his knees, whispering apologies that belonged to another night. Ash did not run. He crept forward on silent pads, pupils blown wide. He sniffed Ethan's sleeve, then touched a single paw to the back of his hand, claws carefully sheathed. It wasn't submission, it was a decision. Willow lowered her head beside him, the bandage forgotten, and the room remembered how to breathe. Ethan steadied. He set the scissors down and gathered both into the cradle of his arms. The tremor left his voice. He told them the story no one else had heard in years. Not the fire itself, but the way quiet hurt after. Ash leaned his weight against Ethan's ribs, an anchor no bigger than a loaf of bread. From that hour, the cabin became a pact. Willow claimed the windows and the hearth's cool edge. Ash claimed the moving parts' door latches, loose hinges, anything that could be solved. Ethan learned to tape wires, to fold towels low, to tuck glass away. The three of them, unlikely as a chord, found their note. The ridge thawed a little. Ash discovered sunbeams and the pleasure of a nap that ended in a pounce. He began sleeping with one paw on Ethan's sleeve, a guard's habit he never explained. When Willow limped to water, Ash matched her pace, shoulder brushing hers, the swagger lowered so her dignity could pass first. Late one evening, the wind rose again. Ethan built the fire higher and checked the latch twice. Ash sat by the door, listening, his tail writing short sentences on the floorboards. He glanced back at Ethan, then at Willow, then settled down between them. Outside, the forest gathered itself. Inside, a family did the same. The thaw came slow, the kind that turns snow to mirrors and wakes the scent of pine. Ethan spent the mornings repairing fences along the ridge, his breath still hanging in the air like smoke. Willow followed at a careful distance, quiet as breath itself. But Ash was a flash of red among grey trunks, chasing birds he'd never catch, daring the wind to chase him back. Ethan often lost sight of him for minutes that felt longer than they were. When Ash reappeared, he came trotting through the trees with that proud sway, tail high, eyes bright, with stories no one else could know. He'd press his forehead to Ethan's leg, purring low, the sound more human than wild. Ethan would smile and murmur, "You always come home, don't you?" That day, though, something different came with him. A smell, oil, and something sour beneath it, gunmetal and tobacco. Ash circled the cabin 3 times before slipping inside, his fur standing in uneasy ridges. Willow hissed once, the low, questioning kind that means something's wrong. Ethan followed their gaze to the edge of the clearing. There, half buried in the slush, was a boot print. He crouched, fingertips brushing the imprint. The heel carried a cut pattern he recognized from years back. Deep chevrons, custom work for men who hunted more than deer. His chest tightened. He hadn't seen that mark since the season he quit the magazines and walked out of the city. Reed Carson. The name drifted back like a curse. Reed had been his guide on one expedition, a man who laughed at boundaries and baited traps where law forbade. They'd argued over a wounded cougar once. Ethan freed it, and Reed never forgave him for the bullet he didn't fire. Ethan rose slowly, the forest whispering around him. Inside, Ash had taken position near the window, pupils narrow, body low. Willow stood behind him, her posture regal but alert. The moment Ethan stepped in, Ash turned toward him, uttering a short growl. then looked back at the tree line as if saying, "He's out there." Ethan didn't answer, just reached for the rifle he kept, unloaded above the door. Old habits returned, easier than faith. Night settled early. The moon hung thin, barely cutting through the fog. Ethan lit the lamp low and sat by the table, camera parts spread before him. He wasn't fixing anything. His hands only needed work to keep from shaking. Ash paced near the door. Each creak of the floorboard made him twitch, the sound of his claws like tiny warnings. A sudden crack echoed through the forest, metal against bark. Ethan froze, heart climbing to his throat. Ash shot to the window, a streak of rusted fire, tail bristling. Willow lifted her head, but didn't move, trusting her companion's instinct. Ethan blew out the lamp and stood in the dark, watching the line of trees sway. Another crack, closer this time, followed by a man's cough and the muttered curse of someone used to owning silence. Ethan opened the door a few inches. The cold slapped his face. He saw nothing, but knew someone was there. He could feel it, like a story waiting to happen again. Ash stepped forward, silent now, eyes glowing, faint in the moonlight. Ethan whispered, "Stay." But Ash didn't. He slid through the gap and vanished into the night. The next moment stretched long as prayer. Then came the sound, first a snarl, sharp and furious, then boots scuffling, a startled shout. Ethan ran, snow biting into his legs. He found Ash standing between him and the trees, fur flared, breath steaming. Beyond the pines, a figure retreated, broad-shouldered, wearing a torn camo jacket. Reed's voice broke the stillness. "You're still feeding what doesn't belong to you, Hale." The words hung like frost. Ethan didn't answer. Reed melted into the dark, leaving the smell of gasoline behind. Ash growled low, the sound vibrating through the quiet. Ethan crouched beside him, hand brushing the ruff of his neck. "Easy, boy. He's gone." But even as he said it, he knew the truth. Men like Reed never disappeared. They circled back when the snow was deepest. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He sat by the fire, camera idle beside him. Willow dozed at his feet, but Ash stayed awake, watching the window. Every now and then, his ear flicked toward the forest, his body tight as a drawn bow. Ethan whispered to him, half a confession, half a plea. "You were born wild. I should have let you stay that way. But now, you're part of this mess with me." Ash blinked slowly. That deliberate gesture of trust only cats understand. Then pressed against his arm. The warmth was small, steady. Outside, the ridge moaned under the wind. Somewhere out there, the hunter had left more than tracks, he'd left a promise. But inside, by the dim firelight, Ethan felt another one forming, silent yet fierce. If danger comes again, we'll face it together. Dawn rose pale, slicing through the cracks in the logs. Ash stood at the threshold, fur catching the light like copper wire, eyes fixed on the forest. He didn't growl this time. He only stared, calm and ready. Ethan joined him, breath clouding the air between them. The world outside might still hold the hunter's shadow, But in that quiet second, the bond between man and wild thing felt unbreakable. Spring crept in shyly, trading snow for mud and small green promises. The air softened, and the river behind the cabin began to talk again. Ethan woke each morning to birdsong instead of wind, and for the first time in years, the season didn't sound like loss. Ash had grown leaner, muscles coiled under his reddish coat, eyes bright with a confidence that carried a hint of danger. He had started disappearing for hours, slipping through the trees like smoke. Ethan followed once, camera in hand, and found him crouched low in the underbrush, tail flicking, studying a rabbit twice his size. The leap was clumsy but brave. The rabbit darted, leaving only paw prints and pride behind. Ash turned, spotted Ethan, and hissed not in fear, but in defiance. The forest was teaching him its own rules. That night, Ethan sat on the porch, sharpening an old hunting knife he hadn't touched in years. "He's changing," he murmured. Willow lay nearby, regal and still, her fur catching the lamplight. Ash prowled just beyond the railing, his movements silent but restless. Ethan whispered, "You were born for this place. Maybe I was too, once." The words drifted into the cool air, and for a moment, the past didn't feel so heavy. Days bled into one another, each filled with small lessons of survival. Ethan began taking both cats deeper into the woods, teaching what he could trace, sense, the meaning of crows overhead. Ash was impatient, cutting corners, charging through brambles. Willow was precise, graceful, the opposite of his impulsive Storm. When Ash failed, he'd growl in frustration, fur-puffed, pride wounded. Willow would walk past him quietly, a single look saying, "Try again." One afternoon, clouds stacked like mountains over the ridge. Ethan waded into the stream to fix a broken net line, while Ash stalked dragonflies along the bank. The water was cold enough to numb the past. Then, a shout his own ripped through the quiet as the bank gave way beneath him. The current swallowed his leg, dragging him under icy foam. His breath vanished. The world narrowed to white noise and panic. When he surfaced, coughing, he heard it a frantic cry, sharp and wild. Ash was there, claws scraping the slick rocks, eyes wide with terror. The little cat lunged, teeth sinking into the hem of Ethan's jacket. Willow appeared a moment later, her larger body anchoring the effort. Between them, inch by inch, they pulled him toward the bank until his knees struck gravel. He collapsed, trembling, half laughing, half sobbing. The sky broke open with rain, soft but relentless. Ash stayed pressed against him, fur-soaked, refusing to move. Willow licked water from his cheek as if to confirm he was alive. Ethan whispered hoarsely, "You saved me." The river answered with a low murmur, carrying the truth downstream. Ash blinked, ears flattened, chest heaving, his small body shaking with exhaustion and pride. Back at the cabin, Ethan built a fire that filled the room with steam and warmth. Ash sat close enough to dry his fur, but far enough to keep his dignity. Willow slept near the door, her steady breathing the rhythm of peace restored. Ethan stared at the flames, realizing something that chilled and comforted him at once. They weren't just learning from him anymore. He was learning from them. That night, he dreamed of running, not as a man, but as something closer to the ground of chasing wind and hearing it answer back. He woke before dawn, the fire only embers, and found Ash perched on the windowsill, eyes fixed on the horizon. The light touched his fur and turned it gold. Ethan smiled softly. "The wild's in you," he said, "but you keep finding your way home." Outside, the forest stirred, green and forgiving. The world felt alive again, and so did Ethan. He watched as Ash leapt down, brushed against his leg once, then slipped through the open door into the morning mist. Willow followed, graceful and sure. For a heartbeat, the cabin stood empty, filled only with echoes of breath and trust. When they returned near dusk, Ethan was waiting on the porch. Ash trotted ahead, a feather clamped proudly in his mouth. He dropped it at Ethan's boot, eyes gleaming. "You're getting the hang of it," Ethan chuckled, voice thick with affection. The feather drifted away on the breeze, and Ash watched it until it disappeared into the trees. Somewhere inside that quiet, something unspoken passed between them, the kind of bond that no wilderness could ever take back. By midsummer, the forest had turned gold and green, full of life and noise. The days stretched long enough for memories to hide inside them. Ethan worked the ridgeline with his camera again, though he no longer cared about perfect shots. He just wanted to remember what light felt like on his skin. Willow prowled ahead like a ghost, and Ash moved beside him, swaggering through tall grass, half guardian, half child of the wild. That morning started with the sound of tires on gravel, a noise so strange now it felt foreign. Ash was the first to notice. He lifted his head, ears twitching, body stiff. Willow froze at the doorway. A truck rolled slowly into the clearing, tan and dust-covered, with a government insignia faint on its door. Ethan's gut tightened. Out stepped a woman in a ranger's uniform, calm eyes scanning the land as if it already belonged to her. "Mr. Hale?" she asked, her voice even, but not unkind. "Riley Morgan, U.S. Forest Service." She extended a hand that smelled of pine resin and rain. "There've been reports of large cats in this area, not native to this ridge." Ethan's heart slowed, then stuttered. He glanced toward the cabin. Two silhouettes hovered just beyond the door. "I live alone," he said quietly. "You won't find much company here." She smiled politely, but her gaze flicked past him to the faint tracks in the dirt, bigger than any house cat's, softer than a cougar's. She crouched, running a finger along the print. "That's a lynx," she murmured, "and something smaller but wild." When she stood, her eyes met his. "You wouldn't happen to know how they got here, would you?" Before he could answer, a sound split the stillness, a sharp growl from the shadows. Ash stepped forward, tail high, golden eyes narrowed. Riley didn't move. "Easy now," she whispered. Her tone wasn't fear, it was respect. Ash's growl softened into a wary hum, the kind he made when strangers approached the cabin at night. Ethan sighed. "He's not dangerous," he said, "just protective." Riley studied them, the man, the animals, the bond that needed no explanation. "They trust you," she said softly. Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "I found them during a storm. They would have died out there." She exhaled, long and low. "You know it's against regulation to keep wildlife." Ethan met her gaze. "I didn't keep them. They stayed." For a moment, neither spoke. The forest filled the space between them with wind and birdsong. Riley's eyes softened. "I'll pretend I didn't see what I saw, but others won't be as kind." She looked back toward the trail. "A man named Reed Carson filed a complaint, claimed you interfered with his property. He's the sort who hunts what he can't understand." Ethan felt his jaw tighten. "He's been around here," he said. "I saw tracks." Riley nodded grimly. "Then you know what you're dealing with. He's under investigation, but he's slippery. Watch yourself." She turned, resting a hand on the truck door. "And if those cats mean what I think they do to you, keep them close. People like Carson don't forgive easily." Ash crept closer, sniffing the air round her boots. Riley smiled faintly. "You've got spirit," she said to him. "Reminds me of an old Tom I had growing up, meaner than winter, but loyal as daylight." Ash blinked as if he understood. Ethan stood behind him, feeling the odd mix of gratitude and fear that comes when mercy has an expiration date. When Riley left, dust rose behind her truck and hung in the heat like smoke. Ethan watched until the sound faded into the pines. Inside, the cabin felt smaller, quieter. Willow returned to her perch near the window, but Ash sat by the door, staring at the tracks left in the dirt. The air smelled of gasoline and warning. That night, Ethan couldn't shake the thought of Reed's name. He checked the locks, though he'd never needed them before. The fire cracked, and shadows danced against the walls. Ash lay at his feet, tail flicking. Willow purred softly in her sleep. "She's right," Ethan whispered. "He won't stop." His voice trembled, not from fear, but from the memory of losing too much once already. He reached down, brushed Ash's fur, and felt the heartbeat beneath. "If anything happens," he said, "you stay with her." The bobcat lifted his head, eyes glowing in the firelight. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Ash pressed his forehead into Ethan's palm, a silent vow made in a language older than words. Outside, the forest rustled, unaware of promises being forged inside that small cabin. Riley's warning lingered like a scent in the air. Trouble was coming, heavy and human. But for now, the fire held, the night wrapped around them, and the bond between man and wild creature burned quietly, steady as the heart of the mountain. The first rumble came low and far, rolling through the valley like a warning from the earth itself. Ethan looked up from the woodpile, the sky already bruised with clouds. The air smelled of iron and wet pine. "Not tonight," he murmured. But storms didn't ask permission up here. They just came. Willow paced by the porch, uneasy, her ears catching distant thunder. Ash sat near the steps, tail twitching, watching the horizon as if he meant to fight the sky. By late afternoon, the wind rose into a voice. It clawed at the trees, bending them until they groaned. The smell of rain deepened, thick and electric. Ethan secured the windows, tied down the tools, and stacked extra wood inside. He'd seen plenty of mountain storms, but this one carried a pulse he didn't like. When he stepped inside, Ash was circling near the door, restless. Willow stood by the hearth, calm but alert, like she'd seen this before. The first lightning bolt split the sky with a crack so close it shook the cabin walls. Ash flinched, then hissed, but didn't run. Ethan crouched beside him, hand steady on his back. "Easy, boy. It's just sound and light." Another flash. This time, Ash didn't move. He stared at the door, muscles tense, waiting for something more real than thunder. Ethan felt it too, a pressure in the air, a promise of something breaking. The storm hit full force at dusk. Rain hammered the roof in wild rhythm, wind screaming through the chimney. Ethan set a lantern on the table, its flame trembling. "We'll ride it out," he said, half to himself. But the words hadn't settled before the crash came, wood snapping, metal clanging. Something had come loose outside. Ash was on his feet before Ethan could stand. Willow called softly, but he ignored her and bolted through the half-latched door into the dark. "Damn it, Ash!" Ethan grabbed his coat and flashlight, stumbling into the storm. The rain cut like glass. Branches whipped across his face. He followed the beam through sheets of water until it caught motion. Ash crouched low, snarling at something near the wood shed. The roof had collapsed under a fallen pine. Ethan's gut turned cold. The structure had pinned half the firewood and part of the tool rack. He stepped closer. "Come here, boy. It's okay." Ash turned, drenched and trembling, but stayed planted. Then Ethan saw why. A sparking wire from the shed's old generator flickered against the metal tools, tiny bursts of blue light dancing too close to fuel cans. One wrong gust, one spark too long, and the whole place would burn. Ethan lunged forward, yanking the wire free, but the movement cost him his footing. The ground gave way, and he went down hard, pain blooming in his shoulder. The flashlight skittered away, its beam slicing through rain and mud. He tried to push himself up, but the world tilted. Somewhere above the roar of wind came a sound, half growl, half cry. Ash. Ethan blinked through rain, seeing that red streak of motion dart toward him. The small body pressed against his arm, then climbed his chest, nuzzling his face with frantic urgency. "I'm all right," Ethan gasped, though he wasn't. "I'm all right, boy." And it's a moon. Another crack split the sky, closer this time, and a tree somewhere behind the cabin toppled with a sound like thunder tearing open the world. The wind shifted. Ethan could smell ozone and pine sap, heavy and sharp. Then, through the blur, another shape emerged. Willow, white fur slick with rain, moving with slow precision. She took position beside Ash, both of them facing the dark woods, as if daring the storm to try again. Ethan pushed up, cradling his arm. Together, they made it back toward the cabin, each step heavy and cold. When they reached the porch, lightning lit the clearing, and for a moment he saw them as they truly were. Two wild souls, born of different blood, standing guard over him. The door slammed behind them just as the wind shifted again, lifting the roof shingles in angry waves. Inside, The fire had nearly died. Ethan stoked it back to life with one hand, his breath coming hard. Ash climbed onto his lap, water dripping from his fur, eyes fixed on him like he couldn't look away. Willow curled near the hearth, her tail twitching once before she settled. The storm raged outside, but in that small circle of light, time slowed. Ethan ran a shaking hand through Ash's wet coat and whispered, "You saved me out there." For hours, they stayed that way. Rain hammered the windows, wind howled through every crack. But the rhythm of 3 heartbeats filled the room. Somewhere deep in that noise, Ethan felt the echo of another night long ago, the one he hadn't survived the way he wished. This time, though, he wasn't alone in the dark. By morning, the ridge lay broken, trees down, fences crushed, mud thick as glue. Ethan stepped outside to the smell of wet soil and smoke. The shed was gone, flattened, but the cabin stood. Ash followed him into the wreckage, paws sinking into soft earth. He sniffed every corner, tail flicking, confirming the world was still theirs. Willow joined them, silent as dawn. Ethan looked toward the valley, the sky now washed clean. "We made it," he whispered. Ash brushed against his leg, then sat beside him, chin lifted, watching the mist clear. It wasn't pride in his posture. It was purpose, the wild kind, and Ethan, sore and soaked and alive, realized something he couldn't quite say aloud. They hadn't just survived the storm. They had weathered each other's loneliness. Inside, the fire still burned low, steady as a heartbeat. The ridge would heal, the trees would grow again, and Reed Carson's shadow still lurked somewhere down the valley. But for this morning, there was only calm, the kind that comes after fury. Ethan looked down at Ash, who stared back with those fierce golden eyes, and he said softly, "You did good, son. You did real good." The ridge was quiet again, but not at peace. Fallen trees still leaned like bones across the valley, and the air smelled of sap and ash. Ethan spent his mornings clearing debris, rebuilding the fence, patching what the storm had torn apart. Willow followed close, careful on the uneven ground. Ash stayed a few steps ahead, nose to the wind, patrolling the perimeter as if daring the world to come back and try again. By midweek, a new sound broke the stillness engines, 2 of them climbing the dirt road with government precision. He didn't need to see the vehicles to know who had sent them. When the first truck rolled into view, green with the Forest Service seal, his chest went cold. Riley Morgan stepped out, hat pulled low, eyes heavy with something that looked like regret. "Morning, Mr. Hale," she said, voice low against the wind. "I told them to give you time, but..." She didn't finish. Behind her, another ranger and a man in a grey jacket unloaded 2 metal crates from the truck bed. Ethan didn't have to ask what they were for. He could hear the rattle of locks, smell the disinfectant. He'd seen the same crates used to move injured bears back into the wild. Ash appeared at the edge of the clearing, ears flat, tail flicking. Willow stood just behind him, silent and steady. "You can't take them," Ethan said quietly. "They're not just animals anymore." Riley's eyes softened, but her posture stayed firm. "I know," she said. "That's the problem." The man in the grey jacket stepped forward. "Regulations are clear. Rehabilitation ends with release. These cats have reached maturity. Keeping them here is a violation of state law. Ethan wanted to laugh, but his throat was too tight. Violation, he said. They saved my life last week. They're part of this land now. The man didn't look up from his clipboard. They're wild, sir. They belong out there. Ash growled a sound low and rising, like thunder gathering its breath. Riley held up a hand. Easy, she murmured. The gesture wasn't for Ash. It was for Ethan, who looked ready to break. He glanced toward the cabin, where the three of them had spent quiet nights by the fire. Storms and memories alike kept at bay. If I let them go, he said, they won't understand why. Riley hesitated. Her voice, when it came, was soft but final. Maybe not, but they'll survive, and that's what you taught them, isn't it? Ethan looked at her, the weight of the truth pressing down. He had always known this day would come. Love in the wild was measured by what you could set free. The crates sat open in the clearing. Ash prowled the edges, muscles tight, breath coming fast. Willow approached first, sniffing the metal floor, eyes darting between Ethan and the forest. Ethan knelt beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder. You were born for this, he whispered. You always were. She leaned her head into his palm, then stepped inside, calm as snow falling. Ash didn't move. He stood his ground, eyes locked on Ethan's. The man in grey shifted, impatient. We don't have all day. Riley shot him, a look that could have stopped wind. Give them time, she said. Ethan swallowed hard, voice cracking. Come on, Ash. It's all right. But Ash only hissed, the sound raw with confusion. Ethan reached out slowly. Listen to me, son, he said. This isn't goodbye. You'll find each other out there, and you'll remember home. His fingers brushed the wet fur at Ash's neck. The bobcat's breathing slowed, eyes flicking from Ethan's face to the forest beyond. Then, as if understanding something deeper than words, he turned and walked into the crate on his own. When the doors closed, the silence hurt more than any storm. Riley touched Ethan's shoulder. We'll take them far from here, somewhere safe. He nodded, unable to speak. The trucks pulled away, tires grinding through the mud. As they disappeared into the trees, Ethan stood alone in the clearing, the wind unraveling around him. That night, the cabin felt hollow. The fire's warmth seemed smaller, its light stretching too far into empty corners. Ethan sat at the table, hands still streaked with dirt. On the floor near his boots, 2 faint paw prints remained in the dust. He traced them with his fingertips, whispering their names like a prayer. Willow, Ash. Sleep came in pieces. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw Ash behind the crate door, eyes bright, unblinking, asking why. He woke to darkness and rain, the kind that taps gentle but never stops. Outside, the forest breathed without them. Inside, his heart forgot how. Morning found him on the porch, coffee untouched, the air still. The ridge looked the same but felt wrong, as if the world had shifted just enough to make him a stranger in it. He stared at the tree line, waiting for movement that wouldn't come. For the first time in years, he didn't pick up the camera. He didn't need a lens to see what he'd lost. Down the hill, tire marks were already fading under wind and dirt. Nature was reclaiming what law had taken. Ethan whispered to the silence, voice cracking under its own weight. "You were never mine to keep, but I wish you'd stayed." The forest answered only with the sound of leaves, soft and endless, carrying his words into the wild that now held them. The trucks had vanished down the mountain hours ago, but their sound lingered like a wound that refused to close. The cabin was too quiet now. The fire popped once, and then seemed to think better of it. Ethan sat by the window, staring at the trail that led into the woods. It felt like staring at a vein that had gone cold. He tried to busy himself. He cleaned the table, stacked the logs, fixed the loose hinge on the pantry door. But every small noise, the scrape of metal, the creak of wood, echoed too loudly in a house that used to have heartbeat. His hands kept reaching for things that weren't there. The soft brush of fur against his ankle, the low purr that used to hum through the floorboards when the wind howled. When night came, it was absolute. He lit a lantern, but couldn't stand the way the light only reached part way across the room. It felt wrong, unfinished. He poured a cup of coffee that went cold, untouched. The forest outside whispered like it always had, but now the sound held distance, not comfort. Somewhere out there were two shapes that once belonged to him and he to them. He tried sleeping, but dreams came fast and cruel. In one, he saw Ash pressed against the crate's bars, eyes wide and unblinking. In another, Willow's coat vanished into the fog, white dissolving into white. He woke before dawn, drenched in sweat, his throat raw from calling their names. The echo of it bounced back from the walls, hollow as the man who'd made it. Morning broke grey and tired. The forest was heavy with rain, every leaf dripping. Ethan brewed another pot of coffee just to fill the silence. He sat at his workbench, sifting through camera rolls that no longer mattered. On one strip of film, he found an image he didn't remember taking Ash, half grown, looking straight into the lens. The focus was soft, but the eyes were sharp, alive, knowing. He held the frame up to the light, the sun catching on its edges. For the first time, he noticed something in the background, a faint reflection of himself in the cabin window, camera in hand, smiling. Not the kind of smile that lasts, but the kind that happens when life sneaks up and reminds you it's still there. The film trembled in his grip. He laughed once, quietly, then set it aside before his throat gave out. Days passed without measure. He marked them only by how long the woodpile lasted. The nights came slower now, heavy but dull, like the ache of an old scar. One evening, a coyote howled somewhere on the ridge. Ethan listened, waiting for an answering call that didn't come. He whispered to the dark, "They're alive. They have to be." The words were steady, but his heart didn't believe them yet. Then, 3 weeks after they were taken, he found it a single feather caught on the porch rail, pale grey with a streak of red near the tip. Too small for an owl, too neat for a hawk. He turned it over in his fingers, the air catching it like a breath. He didn't know what it meant, or if it meant anything at all. But he kept it. He tucked it into the edge of the mirror above his bed. A quiet flag of faith. That night, a storm drifted through again. Not angry this time, but slow and steady. Rain tapped the roof like fingers. Ethan sat by the fire, listening to the rhythm. Without thinking, he reached for the old camera and began to speak into the quiet. "If you ever come back," he said softly, "I'll be here. Same light, same ridge. The world can turn how it wants, but this door will stay open." The words hung there, fragile and warm, before fading into the crackle of the fire. He leaned back, eyes half closed, the camera resting in his lap. Outside, the storm eased, and the forest began to breathe again. The kind of breathing you can almost hear when the world stops pretending it's indifferent. By dawn, the rain was gone. Mist clung to the valley, curling around the trees like smoke. Ethan stepped outside barefoot, the cold biting his skin awake. The world smelled clean, reset. Somewhere deep in the pines, a branch cracked a small sound, ordinary, except for the way it made his heart skip. He waited, but nothing followed. Just the drip of water and the slow sigh of the ridge. He turned back toward the cabin. On the porch rail where the feather had been, the space was empty now. Maybe it had fallen. Maybe the wind had taken it. Or maybe it had never been just a feather at all, but a sign something carried by a small red creature that once refused to give up. He smiled faintly, not trusting the thought, but not denying it either. Inside, the fire caught again, bright and steady. The silence hadn't left, it had simply changed. It wasn't emptiness anymore, it was waiting alive and patient, like the pause between a question and its answer. Ethan poured another cup of coffee, set it by the window, and whispered to no one in particular, "You'll find your way home." How winter came back quietly, as if it didn't want to be noticed. The first flakes fell one morning, while Ethan was splitting wood, pale and harmless. By noon, the valley had vanished beneath white, and the world grew smaller, slower, softer. He stood for a long time, just watching it drift down, knowing how silence could hide both beauty and loss. It had been 3 months since Willow and Ash were taken. He lived by habit now. Wake before sunrise, light the stove, walk the ridge, check for tracks that were never there. The forest carried their ghosts in small ways, the brush of fur against a branch, the faint scrape of claws on frozen bark. He still called their names sometimes, softly, so the mountains wouldn't think he'd given up. Willow, Ash. The sound went nowhere, but came back like an echo that almost believed in itself. That morning, he packed his camera and climbed toward the high pass. The snow was knee-deep and clean, the air sharp enough to cut. Clouds pressed low, and the sky had that heavy look that meant another storm was coming. He wanted to capture it, the way light bent over the ridge before the snow swallowed everything. Maybe that would make the quiet bearable. Halfway up, he slipped. The slope broke under him, a hidden layer of ice, sending him down hard. His leg twisted beneath the weight, and pain flashed hot, quick, cruel. He gasped, tried to stand, but the bone had other plans. The world blurred white. His camera slid down the hill, disappearing into the drift. For a moment, he lay there, tasting iron in the back of his throat, the cold closing around him like hands. He knew this place too well to pretend. A storm this close to dusk meant no one would find him till morning, if anyone came at all. He tried to crawl, each movement leaving streaks of red in the snow. His breath rasped loud, wrong against the wind. "Not like this," he muttered. "Not again." He pressed his palm into the snow to pull himself forward and left another mark behind one more crimson smear on a white canvas. The wind began to howl. Then, beneath it, something else, a sound he thought his mind had invented. Low, sharp, carried by distance, a cry he had memorized without knowing it. Wild, fierce, and achingly familiar. He froze, heart stuttering. It came again, closer this time. He turned his head, and through the curtain of snow, two shadows emerged. One pale as mist, the other dark and burning like autumn. They moved with the grace of memory. Willow first, stepping through the drift, her coat catching the light like silver fire. Ash followed close, fur thick, eyes glowing amber against the storm. They were larger now, stronger, but their gaze was the same, the kind that reached through time and silence. Ethan blinked hard. "You're not real," he whispered. But then Ash let out a low growl that shook the air, and he knew better. They came to him without hesitation. Willow pressed against his shoulder, her warmth steady and sure. Ash circled once, scanning the trees, then crouched beside him, body trembling not from cold, but from urgency. Ethan tried to lift a hand, to touch them both, but his arm felt heavy. "You found me," he said, the words breaking like ice. "You found your way home." The wind screamed again, whipping snow across their faces. Willow hunkered down, shielding him from the gust. Ash stood guard, growling low at something in the dark shadows, moving at the tree line, too tall to be wind. Then came another sound, closer, sharper, the cry of a wolf, answered by two more. Ethan's pulse stumbled. "Go," he whispered. "Get away." But neither of them moved. The first wolf broke from the trees, grey against grey, hungry and desperate. Ash met it halfway, a blur of red and muscle, claws flashing. The snow erupted around them, soundless but violent. Willow lunged beside him, striking fast and silent. Ethan could only watch, helpless, the world spinning between light and shadow. Then it was over the wolves, melting back into the trees, the ground torn and red. Ash staggered back to him, sides heaving, a streak of blood along his shoulder, not his own, or maybe not all of it. Willow stood behind, chest rising, eyes bright and unbroken. Ethan reached out, fingers brushing wet fur, whispering, "You saved me again." Ash lowered his head and pressed his forehead against Ethan's chest, the way he had as a cub, when warmth meant survival. The storm began to ease. Snow fell softer now, like forgiveness. Willow licked the side of Ash's face, cleaning away the red. The world narrowed to the sound of their breathing and the faint crackle of ice beneath them. Ethan's strength faded, but his heart didn't ache anymore. It beat steady, synced with theirs. By the time the rescue team found him the next morning, Riley's voice breaking through the wind, her hands lifting him onto the sled. The clearing was empty. Only his body lay there, half covered in snow, and around him the evidence of something impossible. 2 sets of paw prints circling close, one small, one large, both pressed deep into the red-stained drift. When Ethan woke in the ranger station hours later, Riley was beside him, her face pale from worry and disbelief. "You're lucky," she said quietly. "You shouldn't have survived that night." He smiled faintly, voice raw. "I didn't survive alone," she frowned. "What do you mean?" He nodded toward the window, where snow still fell in the fading light. They came back. Riley followed his gaze, confusion softening into wonder. Outside, the snow had already begun to cover new tracks, leading into the forest. 2 trails that crossed once, then vanished into the white. She turned back to Ethan, but his eyes were closed, his breath deep and peaceful. For the first time in a long while, he was resting, not waiting. Somewhere beyond the ridge, the forest whispered, alive again. The snow had turned red, then white, and the story it left behind was one no one would ever fully believe. But Ethan didn't need belief. He had seen the wild turn back for love, and that was enough. The days after the rescue passed, like a dream half remembered. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and winter. Machines hummed softly, measuring the stubborn rhythm of a man who had outlived both reason and luck. Ethan spent most of that first week staring at the ceiling, listening to the snowplows grind along the road outside. When Riley finally came in, she was carrying a file and a look that didn't belong to paperwork. "You were found miles from your cabin," she said quietly. "We followed the tracks as far as we could before they disappeared." She paused, eyes narrowing. 2 sets, side by side, moving toward you before the storm hit, and then circling. Ethan turned his head toward the window, where frost crept like lace across the glass. "They didn't just find me," he murmured. "They stayed until you came." Riley didn't answer at first. She set the file on the table, opened it to a photo, one taken by the ranger who'd reached the site before the others. In the picture, Ethan lay unconscious in the snow, pale against the red-stained drift. Around him, 2 figures blurred by motion, shapes that defied the camera's focus. Riley tapped the corner. "They were there all night," she said softly. "Your body temperature shouldn't have held, but somehow it did." When he was strong enough to leave, she drove him back to the ridge herself. The road twisted through miles of forest, each turn a memory. The cabin appeared through the pines, like something remembered by the earth smoke curling from a chimney he hadn't lit. A door that creaked the same way it always had. Ethan stepped out slowly, leaning on a cane, his breath visible in the cold. The mountains loomed above, silent witnesses to everything that had happened. Inside, little had changed. The fire pit still held ashes from the last night before the storm. His camera sat on the table, lens cracked but intact, and near the window, pressed into the dust, 2 new paw prints, fresh, faint, and impossibly clean. Ethan's throat tightened. "You kept your word," he whispered. That evening, Riley stayed for tea. Though neither spoke much, she wandered the small room, eyes tracing the photographs tacked to the wall, Willow on the porch railing. Ash crouched on a log, both looking straight at the lens, as if they'd known the photo would outlive them. "What will you do now?" she asked. Ethan poured her another cup, his hands steady for the first time in months. "Keep this place the way it was meant to be. Safe, open." He spent the next weeks rebuilding what had been lost. The cabin's roof, the fences, the trail markers leading down to the stream. It was work that felt like breathing slow, necessary, alive. Every so often he caught movement at the tree line, too quiet to be a deer, too graceful to be coincidence. Once, when he turned, suddenly, he thought he saw them both, watching from the ridge, Willow poised and still, Ash standing beside her, tail flicking. When he blinked, they were gone. Winter thawed into a shy spring. The ridge filled with colour again, ferns unfurling, rivers running high. Riley came by often, sometimes on patrol, sometimes just to sit on the porch and share silence. One evening she brought a small camera with a damaged SD card. "Found this near the pass," she said. "Might have been yours." Ethan nodded and took it gently, the way one accepts something sacred. That night, he charged the battery and scrolled through the frozen images. Most were blank, but one file opened halfway a grainy clip filmed during the storm. The picture was dark, distorted, but the shapes were clear. Two animals moving through the snow toward a fallen man. One leaned down, pressing its head against his chest. The other circled, scanning the woods. Then, for the briefest moment, both looked up right into the lens before the feed went black. Ethan sat for a long time, the screen glowing faintly in the dim cabin. His breath caught between laughter and tears. "What they did when they saw me again," he whispered, finishing the sentence that had followed him through sleepless nights. "They chose to stay." He sent the clip to Riley, who replied only with a single line. "Some things the forest keeps, but some it gives back when we're ready." The next morning, he printed still frames from the video and hung them above the fireplace, two silhouettes in snow, blurred by wind, yet clear enough to break your heart. Years passed quietly. The legend spread in the valley of the man on the ridge, and the two wild souls who found him when no one else could. Scientists came, skeptics wrote articles, but Ethan rarely answered their letters. He preferred the company of the forest, of the unseen movement between trees, of a presence that never left but no longer needed to be seen. One summer evening, he sat on the porch with a mug of tea, the light soft and gold. A gentle breeze carried the scent of pine and memory. From the far end of the clearing came the sound of rustling grass, soft and familiar. He looked up, and there they were, older, larger, but unmistakable. Willow stood at the edge of the light, calm as the mountain itself. Ash, now broad-shouldered and scarred, stepped closer, amber eyes locked on his. Ethan didn't move. He simply smiled and whispered, "Welcome home." They didn't come all the way to him this time. They didn't need to. Ash gave a slow, deliberate blink, the same one he'd given as a cub, when words were too small for love. Then they turned, melting back into the forest that had once taken everything from him, and then returned it in a form he could finally understand. When the last light faded, the clearing held only footprints his by the porch, theirs leading back into the trees. Ethan sat there until the stars came out, the quiet so full it felt like music. For the first time, he understood what peace sounded like. It wasn't silence at all, it was memory, still breathing. And under the slow turning of the night sky, the ridge whispered what every heart learns, too late and too soon, that the wild doesn't just take, it remembers. And sometimes, when it loves you back, it finds its way home again. If this story touched your heart, just drop a 1 in the comments, or a 0 if it stayed quiet inside you. Don't forget to subscribe, there are more gentle stories waiting just beyond the trees.